Do you know what this story about Sooty and his friends is called? No? Well, I'll tell you. It's Vanishing Act. Sooty was awakened by the loud ringing of his alarm clock. He looked at the clock as he reached out to silence it. 7 o'clock. He didn't feel like getting up, as he was still very tired. Oh, I do wish I hadn't stayed up so late reading that scary book, he said. It had frightened him so much that he had been unable to get to sleep for some time. He yawned as he eased himself out of bed and made his way to the window. Pulling the curtain to one side, he peeped outside. It was not yet light, but he was able to see that everything outside was white. He thought. It must have snowed during the night. He said, shivering, and crossing swiftly to his bed, he jumped back into it and buried himself beneath the covers. Normally Sooty liked the snow, but this morning he decided it was just far too cold to get up. He would stay in bed a little longer, at least until Sue and Sweep got up. He felt so tired, so very, very tired. He yawned. Then he yawned once more. He felt himself drifting off into the distance, and soon he was sound asleep. He began to dream. Suddenly the door to Sooty's bedroom burst open, and in swept Sweep, closely followed by Sue and Matthew. "Wake up, Sooty, wake up!" they urged the sleeping bear as they pulled and tugged at his blankets. Sooty awoke with a start and sat up, rubbing his eyes with his little yellow paws. "What's up? What's the matter?" All three began to explain at the same time, but so excited were they that Sooty couldn't understand what was bothering them. One at a time, one at a time. Go on, Matthew, you tell me. Matthew began to explain. "It's Fluff." Fluff was Sooty's pet rabbit. "Fluff," said Sooty. "What about him?" We've just been to feed him," said Sweep urgently. Sooty was not amused. "Do you mean to tell me that you woke me up just to tell me that you fed my rabbit?" No, Sooty, that's just it," said Sue. "We weren't able to feed him." Sooty was puzzled. Why, only yesterday he and Matthew had been shopping for some fresh lettuce and carrots. "There's plenty of food there for Fluff," he said. "Oh, there's plenty of food there," explained Matthew. "The problem is, there is no rabbit there. Fluff has escaped, or he's vanished." "Escaped? Vanished? Fluff?" Suddenly Sooty was wide awake. He remembered that, in the story he had been reading last night, a rabbit had gone missing. Then, one by one, each member of the family had mysteriously vanished. Mind you, he thought, that was only a story. That sort of thing didn't happen in real life. Or did it? No, of course not. Fluff was probably snuggled up beneath his straw. Perhaps Matthew hadn't looked carefully enough. "I'd better have a look myself," he said, as he climbed out of bed and put on his slippers and dressing gown. Closely followed by Matthew, Sweep, and Sue, they hurried down the stairs, and pausing only to collect his torch, he opened the kitchen door and ventured out into the garden. His little paws sinking in the snow, he made his way to the rabbit hutch and shone his torch inside. Then, grasping the door handle firmly, he carefully opened the door, watched by an anxious Sue, Sweep, and Matthew. "Fluff," he said softly. "Fluff, it's Sooty." There was no answering rustle from beneath the straw, so he gently ran his hand through it. Nothing. Becoming more worried, Sooty began rummaging more urgently in the straw and shone his torch into every corner. "Fluff," he said, louder this time. Still nothing. Sooty began grabbing pawfuls of straw and threw them on the snow-covered grass. Soon the hutch was bare, and still no sign of Fluff. Matthew, Sweep and Sue had been right. The rabbit had vanished. Sooty thought again about the scary story, and a shiver ran through his yellow fur. Suddenly, Sweep shouted, causing Sooty to jump. "Look at this, everyone!" They all looked in the direction indicated by Sweep. "They look like footprints," said Sue. Sooty shone his torch on the snow. "Paw prints, to be precise, Sue," he said. That was it. Somehow, Fluff had squeezed out of his hutch and had run off. Yes, that was it. Mystery solved. Sooty breathed a sigh of relief. Now all they had to do was to follow the trail left in the snow by the absent rabbit. There was, though, a problem. It was not yet light, and none of them really wanted to go searching for Fluff in the dark. But if they waited until daybreak, the snow might melt, and the paw prints would not be so easy to follow. No, it would have to be now, or not at all. They decided to put on their warmest woolies and fur boots, and follow that rabbit. After wrapping up, the four of them set off to follow the trail left by Fluff. And as Sooty had remembered to bring his torch and magnifying glass, he led the way, and the others followed closely behind. Matthew also had a torch, and he had decided to bring along a rope as well. Sue had with her a carrot to tempt the rabbit, while Sweep carried a bone, in case they weren't back for breakfast. The trail led them over the garden fence and into a field. "Stay close together, everyone," Sooty called out. "We don't want to lose anyone in the dark." On they went, across the field with Sooty, magnifying glass and torch held close to the ground, cleverly plotting the course set by the roving rabbit. Over another fence, then another, across another field, then another. It was very cold, but none of them complained. They were determined to find Sooty's pet. Finally, they came to the edge of a dense forest and stopped. The snow here wasn't so deep, and there were bare patches here and there where the trees had shielded the ground from the snow. The paw prints would be harder to find now, and Sooty was glad he brought his magnifying glass. "All right, everybody," Matthew said. "We don't want to become separated in the forest, so we'll use my rope to string each other together. That way, at least, if we get lost, we'll get lost together." So, acting on Matthew's advice, they each tied themselves to the rope and entered the forest. They had reached a large oak tree in the centre of the forest when the paw prints suddenly ended. Sooty stopped and looked up. Surely rabbits didn't climb trees? "Oh, no," he groaned. "We'll never find Fluff now." "Wait a minute, Sooty," said Sue. "There's a large hole in the trunk of this tree. Perhaps Fluff has hopped inside." Sooty looked at the tree. Maybe so. Hang on, I'll take a look." So saying, he poked his head inside the hole. It was very dark inside the tree, and Sooty couldn't see a thing. "Fluff," he called softly. "Fluff," the echo gently replied. Sooty switched on his torch, but the light it threw was very dim. The batteries must be running low, he thought. "It's no use, I can't see a thing in here. Hand me your torch, will you, Matthew?" Silence. Then Sooty noticed that there was no light coming back from Matthew's torch. Deciding to investigate, Sooty gently pulled the rope towards him in the gloom. He felt a figure. "Is that you, Sue?" "Yes, Sooty," she replied. Sooty continued to pull in the rope until Sweep came into view. Pulling gently on the rope once more, he reeled it in until he came to a loop at the end. The only problem was that Matthew wasn't in it. He had vanished. "Matthew?" Sooty called. "Where are you, Matthew?" There was no reply. "Now, stop fooling around, Matthew. This isn't funny." Still no reply. "Matthew!" called Sooty, louder this time. Sue and Sweep took up the cry. No reply. Matthew had vanished. First Fluff, now Matthew. Sooty recalled the story he'd been reading and began to get frightened. Suddenly his torch flickered into life. There was no time to lose. They must find Matthew and Fluff whilst the light lasted. Right, Sue and Sweep, I suggest we shout as loud as we can to let Matthew and Fluff know where we are. Sue and Sweep nodded their agreement. Well, do you know, they shouted as loudly as they could. Matthew! Fluff! We're by the big oak tree! Where are you? They carried on shouting for a few minutes before Sooty finally said, It's no use. We'll have to shout even louder. They'll never hear us at this rate. They resumed their shouting. I can't hear you shouting, Sweep. Come on, really shout. When Sweep didn't reply, Sooty said again, Did you hear me, Sweep? I said you'll have to shout louder. Still no reply from Sweep. Fearing the worst, Sooty began reeling in the rope. There was Sue. He reeled it in further. An empty loop. And another. Oh, no. Now Sweep had vanished. Just as in the story, they were vanishing, one by one. Sooty was now very frightened. And so was Sue. Oh, I hope I'm not the next to vanish, Sooty, she said. Try not to worry, Sue. Give me your hand. I'm taking no chances this time. So together, hand in hand, Sooty and Sue walked through the forest, calling out to their missing friends. Matthew! Sweep! Fluff! Where are you? Sooty's torch had by this time gone out, but the daylight was beginning to filter through the trees. We'll soon find them now, Sue, said Sooty as he squeezed Sue's hand reassuringly. There was no reply from Sue, so Sooty repeated his remark. Sue remained strangely quiet. Sooty looked down. Sue wasn't there. He was holding her glove. Only Sue's hand wasn't in it. Oh, no! They've all vanished, just like in the story. And I'll be next. Sooty was now alone and extremely frightened. He began to yell at the top of his voice, Matthew, Sweep, Sue, Fluff, where are you? Sooty was still yelling their names when Matthew, Sweep and Sue ran into his bedroom. We're here, Sooty, we're here, they cried. And, true enough, they were there, around Sooty's bed when he woke up. Even Fluff was there, cradled in Matthew's arms. You're all here, Sooty said, as he sat up and looked around the room. Of course we're here, silly, said Sue. Where did you think we were? I thought you'd all vanished, said Sooty, relieved to discover that it had all been a bad dream. That's the last time I read a scary story at bedtime, he said, as he hugged his friends. And please, Matthew, can Fluff sleep indoors tonight?